Welcome back to We Move Through Stormy Weather, a fish podcast by Storm Sound and Osiris Media. My name is Ryan Storm, and today I'm joined by Scotty Zwang. Scotty is a professional drummer currently residing in Denver. He has recorded and toured with acts like The New Deal, More, Ghost Light, Rack, Chris McClenney, Dopapod, Conspirator, Greenhouse Lounge, Sonic Spank, Clown Vomit, and Code Anchor. Other collaborations have included members of Umphreys McGee, Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, the Disco Biscuits, Lotus, Soulive, Stanley Jordan, DJ Logic, and many more. He is skilled in a wide variety of musical genres, but is most notable for his work within the jam and live improv scenes. He's endorsed by Tama drums and hardware, Sabian cymbals, Promark sticks, and Evans drumheads. Hi, Scotty. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Fantastic. Thank you for coming on today. It's a pleasure to do this podcast with you. It was great to meet you at Peach a few weeks ago. Talk a little bit on your birthday, get to see you play on your birthday with Ghost Light, which was amazing. Now we're here, and I'm excited.
Thanks for having me. The pleasure's all mine. It was a great time. I always enjoy Peach Festival.
Mm-hmm. It was great. Seeing Ghost Light for the first time was really cool. Looking forward to that for years. And you have, as I just listed off, you have quite an impressive resume of acts, which is really, really cool. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But this is, at its heart, this is a fish podcast, and we're here to talk about fish today. And so take me through, start me off. How did you get into fish?
Well, my journey with fish, if you will, started, I was about 8 years old when my dad actually got into fish. He had read sometime around 94, I want to say, an article in Guitar Player magazine on Trey. And so my father's a musician, or at least has always, dabbled with this or that. So when he first found out about him, he bought the records of that time period. So first, like Picture of Nectar and Rift, and then in 95, when I kind of started to discover them through him, Hoist. And it was just always like a childhood memory of like going down in the basement where my dad had like an exercise room set up. And I like have very vivid memories of looking at the Hoist CD booklet and seeing them all in like old time bathing suit and like exercise gear and thinking that this was really weird and just kind of, maybe not necessarily like falling in love with the music at the time, but just feeling like a connection. It really resonated with me. But my journey as like an actual fish fan, I would say probably started around 99 when Farmhouse came out, and just my own discovery of the music, and not just, from a friend or from a family member, and how a lot of people got into music initially. So that was kind of the beginning phases for me, but obviously also the breakup or the hiatus for the band. So really like 03, I know they came back like tail end of 02, but like 03 was really my first experience of like really being a hardcore fish fan. At this point, I was about a year submerged into the jam scene and realizing that this whole entire genre or subgenre existed. And I recall wanting to go to the Fish Festival in the summer of 03 really badly with my brother and his friends. And he was pretty much like, I would love to take you, but I want to have a fun weekend with my friends, and I don't want to be watching my little brother. I was only like, I guess I just turned 16 when this happened. So he was like, but I'll take you to the next one. And then they announced that they were breaking up, and my first festival and real like fish experience was, I'll say unfortunately, as much as I did ultimately have a great time, was Coventry.
Right.
The music was terrible.
That was your first show?
That was my first fish show. Yeah.
Wow.
I was trying to remember if maybe I went to the Brooklyn shows that came about a month or two before that. But I think it was really my first movie theater experience
Got it.
was those Brooklyn shows. So yeah, my first Fish shows were Coventry.
That's
Um,
quite the first Fish experience.
yeah, it was not that great, musically speaking.
Right.
But first time festival goer, this like idea of building a community and people existing with each other in this, large, but in the grand scheme of things, small space for a weekend, was just amazing. And like all the mud couldn't have, really put a damper on it for me. It was still an amazing time. We actually got to drive into the festival and it really didn't take as long, especially
So you
compared
got
to like,
lucky.
yeah, compared to some of the stories you hear. Like we got there like Thursday in the day lot and then got to drive in and set up and enjoy a day before music started. So ultimately it wasn't so bad. I definitely was like in knee-high mud for a few days,
Hmm.
but it was great. And then yeah, when they got back together in '09, I did, made every effort to see as much as possible for like '09 and like 2010. And then it kind of like drifted off a little bit. They're still like one of my all-time favorite bands and a huge influence. Um, but I'm a big improv jam guy, and I feel like for the first few years they were doing really long set lists of like getting through the material and not
Yeah.
so much jamming,
Right.
especially the type 2 jamming, if
Yeah.
you will. So I kind of took a little bit of a break and slowed down on spending a buttload of money going to see Fish constantly. Um, but yeah, it's definitely a thing where, every summer I try to see as many shows as I can. And, if there's a fall tour or whatever that makes sense, I'll try to see them a few times a year.
Right. Awesome. So, will you be at Dick's this year?
Yeah, that's actually the only shows of the summer that I'll be able to see. I don't know how many of them I'm gonna do. I don't have tickets yet, but I'm
Everybody
confident.
gets in. It's not. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's gonna be fun. This year will be my first time going to Dick's, and I'm very very excited.
Oh, nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great time. The whole area is pretty cool.
Yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait. But I love hearing stories of other people getting into Fish from a really early age from their parents or their family or whatever. 'Cause, that's how I got into them through my dad.
Nice.
Um, and Coventry is crazy. Like just what was your impression? You said that the music wasn't great from your perspective there, but what was your impression of seeing your first Fish show, knowing that these were the last Fish shows ever?
I mean, honestly, as sad as I was to see the band go, it was, looking back on it, it was super exciting. I was still in this age where I wasn't too like jaded
Right.
about the music scene and the experience. And I'm fortunate to get to do a lot of cool things within the industry and just what my job entails. But um I remember very vividly just that excitement of like the band's about to take the stage and you got to find the best spot that you can, and there's a shitload of people there, so like trying to get as close as possible.
Right.
And it was just really exciting to know that we were all going to be there for this experience and get to hopefully experience something pretty great. And unfortunately musically it wasn't. Trey, it's no secret Trey was going through his whole drug addiction issues, and it
Mhm.
definitely showed a lot through those shows, so it was kind of weird. And then unfortunately I didn't really get to go to a Fish festival for a while. And then a few years ago I was like, you know what, now's the time. How much worse could it also be than Coventry? And
Yeah.
they literally scanned my ticket, and I heard over the radio
I
that
was gonna say,
Curveball was
I was gonna
canceled.
say you said a few years ago, and I was like, oh no, I know how this story ends.
Yeah, so those are my only two Fish festival experiences: is Coventry and about 12 to 16 hours on site, because they let us come on site for the people that were there
Yeah.
and set up camp. And then yeah, at like by noon the next day, they were like, everyone's got to get off the site.
Yeah.
So not the best luck with Fish festivals, but still, good stories nonetheless.
Yes, definitely, definitely. And Thank God they came back, right?
Yeah, exactly,
You
and
keep
they're
saying
playing
that.
better, and I don't wanna say they're playing better than ever, but
Oh, I
I
agree
do
with
feel
that, though.
like they're playing better than they have since, the 3.0, if you will,
Yes.
phase of things.
Yeah, the summer tour so far, just to break the fourth wall a bit for everyone listening, we are at the time of recording, Fish is 5 shows into summer tour 2023, and it has been a hell of a run so far. I'm very excited to see 12 shows this summer. I'll say that.
Nice.
But let's dive into the song that you picked today. This is my first time doing it. Not a song I thought really would be discussed on the pod at length, but I'm excited about it. You were pretty quick to pick this one when I said you got to pick a song, and it's Forbin's Mockingbird.
Yes.
So departing from usually it's more of a jam analysis, the evolution of throughout the band's career. This is not. This is more of a narration kind of deal, and you picked a good one from the most recent performance of Gamehenge on 7/8/94,
Yeah,
which is
so this
cool.
is one of my all-time favorite shows. So I knew the show I wanted to pick,
Hmm.
or at the very least, I narrowed it down to summer
94.
94.
Yeah.
There's just way too many amazing shows through that time period, and like a lot of Fish fans, I feel like I'm still chasing this dream that I'm gonna go to a show one day, and they're gonna do all of Gamehenge,
Yeah.
and I know that they did it a few times that summer. But I feel like, well, there's the recording of it, and they did the dinner and a movie during the pandemic.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I feel like this is the best, you know, representation of it. So
Yeah, definitely. And so this one is really cool. And so you just kind of started talking about why you picked this show, but tell me about why the Forbin's Mockingbird was specifically what you went to from the show and what you wanted to talk about here.
I mean, I'm a huge, as much as I love improv, I do have a huge spot in my heart for composition. A lot of the uh older classic rock, or however you want to, put it, some of my favorite bands are all based on the fact that they have really solid compositions, and especially, taking that like page out of Frank Zappa's book of being like modern composers. And I feel like Trey was at his peak doing this. It's kind of crazy to think about, like, through, let's say 83 or 84, but like during his, final years at Goddard and writing this music as his
Hmm.
senior thesis. I have a lot of respect for the fact that this is what it was. It's funny listening to like old recordings of it, and how the composition itself, was written and it existed, but all the playthrough with the other members of the band, I feel like really evolved and finally got to a super solid point. I mean, there's a lot in that 88 Colorado run that you could
Yeah.
hear that's like perfect, and they really haven't steered away from that since. But I feel like by 1994, they were really like firing on all cylinders. I mean, there's definitely a lot from like 89 to, up until that point, and that they have solid recordings that I love, which was also hard in picking this. It's like, do I go with like 89? I'm forgetting the park that they played in that
Telluride?
they no, it's not Telluride's the 88 Colorado tour,
Oh,
but
okay.
for like the official Fish release, like when they did the CDs with the booklets and stuff,
Got it.
um, there's like a whole bunch of amazing shows from 89, and 91 has some incredible stuff. I want to say like Bomb Factories from
94.
90.
Bomb Factory's
Bomb
spring
Factory is
94.
94. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but there's just like Tinley Park 93. Like there's a lot of that time period that I'm just like still fascinated with. And as much as there's a lot of arguments on when was their best year of playing, and
Right.
obviously 95, or going out of 94 into 95 MSG, and all these things are amazing. But there was just something about this show in particular, and especially the game hedge concept of it, where like they played everything perfectly. The narration I think was handled really great.
Yeah.
And you know, there's just something absolutely incredible about a song like Colonel Forbin's and how like it goes into Fly Famous Mockingbird. It was why I was like, can I do two songs? They're kind of
Right.
one and the same, you know?
Yeah, it works. It works well together here, and yeah, your point about the narration in this show, yeah, the narration, in this segment, just it has so much purpose from Trey. He knows where he's going with it. There's no meandering. That's part of other Forbin's Mockingbird narrations are like isolated, and maybe he kind of thought about it before the show, or like it's just kind of coming up with it. This is he's telling the story of Gamehenge, so he knows what needs to be told in this segment before I believe the sloth is next. But before he gets to the next song, he knows what he needs to cover, and he gets there. And it's just your point about the creation of Gamehenge and how cool that is. And like doing it in a bar in Colorado in 1988 is one thing, but doing this on stage at Great Woods in 1994 in front of thousands of people who are like in rapture, like getting to see the full performance of Gamehenge, like that's incredible.
Yeah, it's, and as far as like a legitimate historic amphitheater goes, I still consider this kind of their backyard. Obviously, Great Woods
Yep.
is in Massachusetts, but it's pretty close. And obviously, there's also like family ties. I know with Gordon growing up like relatively close to the area, where there's just you could tell there's something really special about it. And to go back to like your original question, I just feel like the composition in a piece like this is absolutely incredible, the technicality behind it all, and it still just amazes me that a 21, maybe even 22-year-old was able to come up with
Right.
this
This.
entire
Yeah.
concept. And this little bit of it I just feel like is some of the most impressive music in my experience. It's super nerdy, the whole concept, and I'm into that
Yeah.
100%, but it still doesn't take away from the fact that like this is like a modern classical piece of music done as a four-piece rock band. So
Yeah. That's amazing. That's very, very, very well put. And I always think about these older compositions like in like stuff like Yam and everything. Like I'm like Trey wrote these when he was my age. Like
yeah.
I can't imagine. Like how do you come up with this? Like it's let alone coming up with a composition like this when you're like decades into your career and you know what you're doing, whatever. But like being like I'm gonna eat a bunch of acid at age 22 and just like write Yem, like
Yeah.
how I like it's crazy, it's mind-blowing. And yeah, the Fly Famous Mockingbird is one of the most complex compositions in the Fish catalog.
Yeah.
There's some crazy shit that happens in there. And
Yeah,
I,
it's
I
what
don't know. I don't know enough about music theory to really get into detail on that. I just know that it's absurdly complicated.
Yeah, and I think there's a reason too that they haven't played it. To my recollection, I don't think they've played it since 2016 or something like
No, they
that.
played it in 2021 at Shoreline.
Oh, they did.
Yes.
Okay. I
Yeah.
tried to do a little bit of research into the when was the last time they did it, cuz I haven't seen one, I don't believe. So,
The last Mockingbird was at Shoreline, and then before that the Baker's Dozen, and then 2015, 2013. So it's only been played since they came back in 2009. It's only been played 9 times.
gotcha.
Yeah. So pretty long gaps there.
Yeah.
And so, we talked about your pick. The one that I picked today is from Super Bowl 7-3-11. This show's very special to me. I've talked about this on the podcast before, but this is the show that hooked me on Fish. When my dad went to Super Bowl in 2011, and then gave me on my iPod these shows, and 7-3 set one. Specifically the Reba, but this whole show really was just like, okay, like this is amazing. And this Forbin's, even when I knew nothing about the band, I really felt drawn to the narration because the narration here comes in between Forbin's and Mockingbird, and there's something about just the goofiness of what's going on. It's you're playing at your ninth festival in front of tens of thousands of people. This is the day after they did the Storage Jam. And the Trey was just so excited to get on stage and be like, I'm gonna blow their minds with this connection to the Storage Jam, with this wild story that I'm about to tell. And talking about, again, I mean, you brought up Colorado '88. This directly ties into Colorado '88 with this narration, which I think is pretty cool. But talking about, like driving out there in 1988, and he's like, oh, by the way, like Page was the best driver. Fishman, was the best at driving a long distance. He said, like, too busy screwing around with the radio and being distracted, and therefore was not allowed to drive. Trey, and then that Mike was the worst driver because he would write in his journal while driving, which, like, yeah, and you can hear, like, the huge smile on his face while he's telling all these stories. Like, it's amazing.
I agree.
Yeah. And then, and it keeps going on with the narration, how they were driving this old Plymouth Voyager, and they get stuck in this storage unit. And then they just started playing and created a mental projection with the music, and that everything since 1988 in a storage unit is like, all an illusion, and, they're going to stop playing and it's going to vaporize and they're still going to be in the storage unit. And then, I obviously, everyone should go listen to this actual narration, because I can't tell it as well as Trey can. But to sum it up, the famous Mockingbird now is a postal delivery bird, and is bringing them a key or a special product to get them out of the storage unit. But it all ties into the crazy storage jams from the night before, which would then be hugely influential on the band's music for the rest of that summer and going forward in 3.0. And that's kind of, you talked earlier about how they weren't jamming so much at the beginning of 3.0. The Storage Jam was the opening of Pandora's box, kind of getting them back into it. You have some big jams before, like the Albany 7 Below Ghost in 2009, the Blossom down, or Pine Knob Down with Disease, I believe it's 6/4/11, which I think is the best jam of 3.0 until somewhere in mid 2012. But the Storage Jam was really when it was like, okay, like we can get back into deep space here. This is not, like we're going to get there again. And I mean, they did.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of the thing. I think it was around this time period and after hearing of friends that went to Super Bowl that I was like, okay, I think it's time for me to go back and see. I mean, there had only been about a year or so that I was like, I'm tired of spending $100 a night to go see my favorite band just play songs that I can go back and listen to better versions with longer jams from, a decade or even longer before. But I definitely have that spot where I'm just like, I'm constantly chasing something. And I'll say that it's Gamehenge, like I think a lot of people, but it's not just about this one, group of songs for me. I mean, the band has quite a repertoire of music, whether it be amazing choices in covers that I feel like they've kind of taken on as their own, or just the, hundreds of compositions that they've written themselves that really resonate with me. So I feel like it was around this time period that I was like, okay, I think I need to go. I think I was also just jealous and upset that I missed a solid festival. I mean, Festival 8 I thought was great. I really liked the concept. The album was awesome, and it was cool
set,
and it was cool that they did a West Coast festival instead of doing it, typically in their, at least close enough to their homes in the Northeast. Or obviously, I know Big Cypress is obviously
Big Cypress is
pretty
its own
thing,
thing,
but yeah. Cypress. So I think it was just I need to get back into this. I might miss something, so I need to go as often as I possibly can.
It's just when I think I'm out, they pull me back in.
Exactly.
You can try to quit Phish all you want. You can go back, listen to like ton of other bands, but then for me, like, not that I've lost any of my love for Phish, but I follow Goose so intensely these days, and they've been touring so much for the first half of this year. And it's like, then I end up listening to so much Goose, and then Fish tour starts, and I'm like, oh yeah, like, here we go again. Like this is what, and then like my excitement for the shows that I'm seeing this summer just keeps growing, with every night that happens. And yeah, you can't escape your love for the best band in the world.
Yeah, it's one thing to see a band that, is heavily influenced and does a really great job with this music that you love versus seeing the band that like arguably started,
Yeah.
it all for at least the modern jam bands. I mean, obviously I'm not trying to take away from the importance that is the Grateful Dead or even the Allman Brothers for that matter,
Mhm.
but
Different.
it's definitely you can hear with our generations of jam bands that, Fish has a huge part in how people decided that this was the kind of music that they were going to make.
Yeah, and I was talking to someone about this the other day. When the Dead would go type 2 or whatever, it would mostly be, like kind of like a free jazz kind of thing, just like kind of in space, everyone kind of doing, nonsense. And that's awesome. But
Yeah.
Fish kind of pioneered the really cohesive type 2 jams
Yeah,
that we hear now.
they're composing on the spot.
Yeah.
And not that the Dead hasn't done stuff like that as well, but I agree. It does come more from you can tell these people, although they grew up, loving bluegrass and like the folk music of that time, you can tell that like jazz and especially like
Yeah.
the Miles Davis Bitches Brew era of things had like a huge influence on what you could do with electric instruments,
Hmm.
especially the guitar and just improvising in a rock band setting. So
Yeah. Well, yeah, like if you listen to like, the Dead in the early 70s, you're not getting like, something that like Fish kind of did. Like, you're not getting a jammed out, for example, you're not getting a jammed out Tennessee Jed.
yeah,
Tennessee Jed's going to be 6, 7 minutes. It's going to be great. You're going to get a nice Jerry solo. But, there's not going to be a random Jed that's just going to be 20 minutes. With Fish, any song on any night can be the jam vehicle. That's been a huge thing the last few years. Just like, what happens if we jammed out Sample in a Jar? What
yep.
happens if we jammed out the end, like last year at Blossom? What happens if we jam out the ending of Free instead of the middle jam part of it? Like that's the Fish thing. It's the unpredictability that anything can happen. If you're, and I mean, I feel like it might seem at this point like I'm knocking the Dead. I'm not knocking the Dead at
Oh
all.
no, no,
I
no, I
love the
get it.
Grateful Dead so much. But like, they start playing in the band, they start Dark Star, Bird Song, etc. Like, hey, these are the jam vehicles. These are where I'm getting the jam. With Fish, they could start Tweezer, and then it could be 8 minutes long. Then they could go into something else. It's
Yeah.
it's not necessarily going to be the jamming highlight of the show just because it's one of their biggest jam vehicles. And that's one of the things I love about them so much.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like you said, I've said before with other bands, like without much like how the modern jam bands that we have now, Goose and all these would not have existed without Fish.
Mhm.
Fish wouldn't have existed without the Grateful Dead,
Correct.
and even more so talking about song like Colonel Forbin into Fly Famous Mockingbird, without their influence of Zappa and the musicians of that time that were really composing music. They were just the modern composers. They were the Beethovens, the Mozarts of that time
Yeah.
period, using the instrumentation that was new and around for them to pick at. But what's interesting is that Zappa. It's no secret that Zappa's bands were heavily rehearsed. That they would do maybe multiple shows a night or multiple shows without a run, and they would do this set list and they would rehearse it so that then they can pick and choose. It was how he was able to get so much material out and constantly putting out records of taking little bits from this live show that they liked and going back and overdubbing a different instrument, redoing the vocals, whatever it might be. Whereas with Fish, they kind of took those concepts of things, but they kind of did it still in this improvised way, live
Yeah.
and stage, taking the risk, understanding that sometimes you're gonna play like shit, but at least you took that chance to get to those, whether it's a type 2 or whatever, to get to something that you wouldn't have gotten to otherwise if you didn't, take a leap of faith.
Yeah, it's Paige talks about this in the It documentary, where it's, there might be a 35-minute jam where, and this is especially true of the 2.0 era, there might be the 35-minute jam, and the first 15 minutes of the jam are like nothing crazy, but then they strike gold, in the last 10, 15 minutes. I know that math doesn't add up to 35, but the
No,
point
but
I'm
if
making
yeah,
stands. You need that first chunk to get to whatever they're going to find after searching for 15 minutes. And with each year that goes by, and they're now 40 years into their career, like the time needed to get to that like amazing improv point just keeps getting shorter.
yeah.
Every tour now, it's like they're in full type 2 zone like 2 minutes into the jam. Like, there's no time being wasted, which is so cool to hear, the maturity of which that they play with, and the intense connection that they share musically. They're 4 quarters of one brain at this point. And that's the thing you don't get with the younger jam bands yet, which is not their fault. It's just they haven't been playing together for decades, and so they don't have this kind of musical connection that the 4 Guys and Fish have, and that's really cool. And I wanted to also mention your point about kind of making new songs out of what comes out of a live show, and you can hear that, in some cases with Fish, and if you listen to like 1974 Grateful Dead shows, you hear Jerry playing around with Slipknot like a
Mhm.
ton throughout the year before that song was written. But if you go back, you can find things like 8718, that the light from that show is the birth of We Are Come to Outlive Our Brains, which would be, in the Casvat Vaxxed Halloween
Mhm.
set later that year. You can hear, them playing the chord progression from that song that wasn't written yet. And that's clearly where, when they were writing those music, or those songs, one of them was like, hey, we played this cool progression in August. Let's make a song out of that. And
Yeah.
it's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy when stuff like that happens. I
Mhm.
I feel like you don't catch it so much with a band like Fish, or maybe I just don't, cuz I kind of don't listen to uh any modern live Fish shows, whether I've been
Fair.
there and I enjoyed them or not. I very much enjoy the experience of being there in the moment,
Mhm.
and that energy and feeling that vibe, like Trey says in the Bittersweet Motel documentary, that like it's not about getting all the transitions, it's not about like I messed up and I missed this note
Mhm.
or whatever. It's all about the vibe. And I find a hard time getting sucked back into it. And maybe it's also that I'm just one of those people that like I go back to these 1990s shows because I feel like I missed it. And also like they're in their, late 20s, early 30s doing this thing. They're still like, relatively young, and there's a lot of like piss and vinegar and like really going for it, and you obviously learn a lot and mature. Like the machine gun Trey, if you will, as people say, era
Yeah.
is probably not going to happen again, because it's hard to get that when you are in your 50s or your 60s.
Yeah. Yeah.
You learn a lot over time of like, maybe I shouldn't be overplaying and I should have a little more intent with what I'm doing. And not that they didn't have that intent. I do have an understanding of when musicians mature and they don't, whether it's a physicality or just like that mental concept of like, I don't need to play a million miles an hour. Like, that's not what this is about.
Right.
But I do like that time period of things. Or like if Trey hits a wrong note, like there's still like intent within it where like somehow he makes that wrong note right.
Hmm. Yeah. Amazing. Your point about kind of the musical maturity is something I wanted to transition into asking you about. Your own musical projects and your musical playing. And I was curious, going back to when you went to Coventry for the first time, were you already playing drums?
Yeah, I started playing drums when I always thought I was 8 years old. I kind of lumped it in this like 95, like I heard Fish for the first time, and then my dad got me a drum set. But
Mhm.
I did see a receipt recently where my dad was correct in that I started playing drums when I was 9 years old, so 96. I might have had a drum pad before that, and that
Yep.
was kind of what sparked my dad's interest in like, oh, it looks like he likes this instrument. Let's get him a drum kit. And my dad played drums when he was a kid too. So he had a lot of respect and support of, and my mom too, of like, let's get our son like the loudest instrument known to mankind just naturally. Especially when you're a kid and you don't have concepts of like dynamics and what to do. You're kind of just beating the crap out of them.
Right.
So yeah, I had a drum kit when I was 9, and the first year was probably kind of terrible for everyone in the house. And then I slowly started to connect with the instrument, and I wasn't really into jam bands or any of that stuff. I mean, like I said, my dad showed me Fish. My dad's a huge Allman Brothers fan, and then any of the other like classic rock of that time period. Maybe was in my like lexicon of music. But by like 96, 97, especially in 98, I started to kind of develop my own love for music, and it was really in that, post grunge time period of stuff. So, you know, um the Nine Inch Nails and Nirvana, but like Foo Fighters, Incubus, 311, Sublime. So like
Mhm.
the first record I ever played and like learned essentially note for note from beginning to end was Sublime's self-titled record. Bradley had just passed away, and it was all over the news, and I kind of fell into that zone. And it wasn't until like fall of '02 that my brother took me with his friends to go see Soulive. And
Yeah.
that was where everything changed for me. And, I spent a lot of time from 99 to '02 playing drums constantly and learning all of that time period's alternative rock. But by, fall of '02 and especially '03, like I was a full on hippie, I'm fortunate enough to get to play with them now, but like
Mhm.
2001 was really the first time I heard jam music on my own when my friend showed me the New Deal, and I had no idea that that music could be played with live instruments.
Right.
Um, and especially as a drummer, I was so used to that music being played with drum machines. So this concept of like, oh, I could sit downstairs in my basement and I can play these beats and do this, and I can make people dance in that sort of way was just really interesting to me. And flash forward to 22 years later, and I get to play in the New Deal.
Mhm.
But yes, during that time period, I would say is really where my music style like evolved into what I do for a living now.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it was definitely a lot of practicing and playing and playing and playing all of the time. I mean, high school definitely had its moments of like, I'm now, you know, a derelict teenager smoking weed and not going home and practicing for hours and hours. But
Yeah.
I definitely played a lot all through, age 9 through like 18 or 19, and then I joined this band Code Anchor in when I was 19 years old, and I dropped out of college, and I went back to playing, essentially 8 hours a day. Or at least I
Wow,
was
yeah.
in at least I was in a rehearsal room practicing playing drums, working on vocals and all these things I hadn't done before for an 8-hour time period. Now, it was probably closer to like 4 or 5 hours of physically practicing or playing my instrument or working on my vocals, but um I dove headfirst into this is what I'm going to do for a living,
Mhm.
and it takes practice. So
Yeah, amazing, amazing. And so going to Coventry in '04 for the first time, being a drummer, was there something about the way Fishman was playing that like stuck out to you there, or did you go in already prepared, knowing like this guy is, incredible at the
oh,
drums?
I was fully obsessed with all of Fish at this point.
Yeah.
Much like a lot of people, Trey, and like viewing him in like this godly kind
Yeah.
of way, and which is kind of
Still do
weird.
it.
But Fishman, yeah, was definitely a huge influence in just what you could do with your instrument. Whether it was different time signatures or playing this feel on top of that feel, or even this time signature on top of that time signature, or you take a song like Taste,
Yeah.
which, all of them are in a different time signature, and Fishman's limbs are each in a different time signature.
Yeah.
And it really, it's like it's hard to do this concept for some people. Now, imagine growing two more arms, or even trying to do something with your,
Legs,
legs or
yeah.
whatever it is, and having to do all of that at the same
And also
time.
singing.
Yeah. It's intense. Does he sing for
He sings
Taste
in
as
Taste
well?
too, yeah.
Yeah. So he's doing 5 different things all at the same time. And it's absolutely, mind-boggling to me. I mean, a lot of people I feel like hate on the record. I don't know why, but with with Farmhouse, like you have, you know, even songs on there that are I'm a terrible Fish fan right now and I'm blanking on a song, but like there are definitely songs on there too where I'm like, what is he even doing? I have no idea how he is able to do limb by limb. I mean, is a
Another
fantastic
amazing
example
example,
of
yeah.
like, it's absolutely crazy how he does it. And if you don't watch him do it, you'll spend your entire life trying to figure out how he actually does it.
Right. It's I just remember the first time I really kind of appreciated Fishman's drumming, and I was just kind of watching him play and being like, oh my god, like he's so tight while at the same time being so loose. Like there's so much space in his groove when he's playing. I feel like a lot of other drummers I listen to, especially in jam bands, they're a lot tighter into the groove. But I always remember this interview with Stuart Copeland that I heard about when he went to go see Fish in 2015. I think it was at the Forum in LA. And he was talking about how he was in the crowd at one point, and he was listening to Fishman and being like, "Wow," he's like, he's really playing. And then he went side stage and was watching and was amazed by how light Fishman's touch is on the drum
Yeah.
while getting so much sound out of the kit,
Yeah.
which is so cool.
He's a big influence. I mean, some of the bands that I get to play with, especially like the Tom Hamilton projects and his work with Joe Russo and Russo's connection with the Fish guys
Mhm.
and all of that stuff, which I went to a bunch of those grab tours and seeing
Those are
Phil
cool
and
shows.
Friends, and I was obsessed with the duo. I think I discovered them in like '05, so it was pretty constant of seeing them and whatever tours they were involved with. But this concept of a lot of bands, and especially in our jam band world, they can really play dynamically between, 4 and up. And especially a lot of them sit in this like 6 to 9 range. And like 10 is like, it happens a bunch, but like
Mhm.
it's really hard for people to sit in this like 1 to 3 zone where a lot of like magic can happen, but like it involves not only the musicians to be really focused and to really listen to each other, but it also requires the audience to really be focused and listen to each other. And that can be tough when you have, tens of thousands of people in the audience, and not to be mean, but probably 25% of them are chompers that like just like to talk the whole
Right.
time, and they don't realize that the band is dynamically bringing things down to a point so that they can listen to each other and you can listen to them. And instead of taking it as like, let's focus in on what they're trying to do, it's this like, oh, let's talk. Or if they get into a really uncomfortable, weird, out there avant-garde section, similarly, I don't know if it's because people are physically uncomfortable with like the weirdness that is happening, or if it's
Mhm.
just a quiet moment that people feel like it's like now's the time to talk. And it's like, I feel like you're missing the point. This is the time to listen. You can kind of talk and still absorb music when people are playing in this 5 to 10 range, but like anything lower than that is really when you want to start paying attention to like what it is that they're trying to say, especially when you spent $100 or more to go to this concert or for have the experience. To just talk the whole time has always been kind of confusing to me.
Yeah, I'll never get that either. People are weird. But before we wrap up the discussion here, I do
Yeah,
want to highlight, give you the opportunity to talk about your current projects and things that you have coming up
sure.
this summer, this fall, rest of this year.
Yeah, I mean, a bunch of my projects right now are in this like either waiting until next year to tour, whether that's because we're in a creative process or we had, a crazy year last year. I don't think at this point it's much of a surprise that Ghostlight had a lot of changes happen in 2022. So we really took this year off. Peach was the only show. I'm glad that you got to see it.
Me too.
So, but next year should be relatively busy. And I just moved out to Denver. So, I'm doing a bunch of the Colorado stuff and just playing with a lot of people out here and getting to know all of the musicians in the music industry out here. A lot of them that I've never even heard play or have met before. So it's been nice to get to do that and to just kind of be in this creative zone as well at home of getting to do stuff. I have this amazing studio set up here where, I can work on my craft, but also I can record and experiment as much as I possibly want. So that's nice. But I do have a few things here or there. My project More with Tom Hamilton and like the original Brothers Pass guys.
Hmm.
We have some stuff that we've just constantly been putting out, especially since our performance at Playing in the Sand earlier this year.
Yeah.
Um, and then we have, I think, some shows and stuff that we're about to announce, as well as like more recordings and things that we've worked on. So there's been a lot more of a creative process than a touring process, which is nice. I definitely miss touring. It's a big part of why I do what I do is I enjoy getting to experience different cultures and eating different foods and seeing new places. Sometimes the touring lifestyle means that you really only get to see the inside of your hotel room and
Yeah.
the lobby for maybe 10 or 15 minutes and then the inside of the venue. But I do enjoy the chaos that comes with touring and going out and playing music and obviously most importantly the getting to play on stage in front of people. That whole energy exchange is why I really do this. But I'm enjoying this slower pace of life at the time and getting to enjoy Colorado's nature and going on hikes and doing all that stuff when I'm not working on music, which I do
Hmm.
have a lot happening out here. Random jam nights and other shows, even some weddings. And I'm essentially
Love it.
I moved out here with the concept of for 6 months I'm going to take pretty much anything that is thrown my way so that I can meet new people and have different experiences. And there's also something, whether it's learning, a lot of it learning covers, but spending time to focus on music that I don't normally play or even know for that matter,
Hmm.
that I feel like it sucks me into this role of not only being completely in sync with my instrument, but it also at a certain point fully inspires me to be like, okay, I don't want to do that anymore. I just want to focus on original music. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's been nice.
That's really cool. And fans of Ghostlight and more like that, if you haven't checked it out already, the previous episode of We Move Through Stormy Weather is an interview that I did with Tom Hamilton at Peach. We talk about those projects. He hints the same thing that you do, that there's very exciting things coming for more pretty soon and Ghostlight next year. And so I'm very excited about all of that. But yeah, definitely go check out that episode. It's a fantastic, fantastic, quick little 15-minute interview that I did with Tom before J-Rad's set at Peach. But I'm very excited for everything to come. I look forward to seeing you at Dick's in September. That's going to be
Yeah,
a
for sure.
very fun
Definitely,
weekend.
definitely hit me up. Don't be a stranger. Also, Did you just talk with Tom for 15 minutes, or did you talk about fish at all?
There will be a fish episode with Tom in
Okay.
the future. That will happen. We've dipped our toes in that one a little bit. I've kind of gotten the vibe on what his opinions are, and I'm very excited to talk to him.
He's got a spot in his heart for them. Don't let him fool you. It's just,
Oh yeah.
he loved them so much that he had to steer away from them so that it didn't come out in his music. So,
Right. No, and I know how much he loves him based on the teases that get thrown in J-Rad shows,
Yeah.
pretty frequently,
Yeah.
which is always fun. So yeah, I'm looking forward to doing a fish episode with him as well.
Nice, dude.
Yeah. Well,
Well,
thank you so much for coming on the pod today, Scotty. It's been a pleasure to sit down with you and chat, and I look forward to seeing, many of your projects in the future. Obviously, I can't wait to see Ghost Light again. I look forward to hopefully seeing more at some point in the future and everything else that there is to offer.
well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I had a lot of fun, and it's always nice to talk about one of my favorite bands with another fellow fan, especially since sometimes I feel like there's this like taboo in a way of like if you're in a band in the jam band scene that like
Right.
you can't just talk about fish all the time because it's just the obvious go-to. But I'm a music nerd who loves fish, and I'm glad I had the opportunity to discuss it with another fellow fish nerd.
Yes, it's the best way to be.
Yeah.
And thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of We Move Through Stormy Weather. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode from another musician in the jam scene that I met at Peach that I'm actually recording 2 hours after this one, breaking the fourth
Nice.
wall. But everybody have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow @Stormy Podcast on social media if you're not already. Let me know your favorite parts of this episode, your favorite versions of Forbin's Mockingbird, your favorite narrations. Throw that out there as well. Let us know. We want to hear from you and hear about your favorite versions. So thank you again for listening, and I will see you next time.